students, I'm Aanchal Sharma, your educator for paper 1. We have been discussing questions and PYQs related to environment and the concepts related to that as well. So in this video also, we'll be discussing few questions related to the protocols, and they are very important. We are also going to see the detailed explanation related to all of these questions. So this is the list 1 and this is list 2 given to you, and these are the environmental protocols, different agreements and different action plans. There are different provisions and you have to see in which protocol this provision was given. So we have Montreal Protocol, we have Paris Agreement, we have Climate Action Plan, and we have Kyoto Protocol. This is your list 1, and then we have list 2. There are provisions. The first is integrated water resource management, then we have emission trading, then we have phasing out ozone depleting substances, and then we have the intended nationally determined contributions. So when was all of these things? These are the different provisions, and these are the different acts or different action plan, different amendments, different protocols, different environmental protocols that came into being. So you have to match the following. Now let us see the correct answer. The correct answer for this question is D. That means A would be joined by 3. Now let us see A by 3. Then we have B by 4. Then we have C by 1 and D by 2. Now let us first see, and then we'll see. Then we'll look at the explanations. So we have the Montreal Protocol. Montreal Protocol is basically a protocol that talks about the depletion of the ozone layer, and you should remember it, right? So phasing out of the ozone depleting substances is what is intended. What is the provision of Montreal Protocol? We saw that there was depletion in the ozone layer. Hence, we came up with Montreal Protocol, which talks about that there are some substances that target, and they are the basic causes of the depletion of the ozone layer. So we have to phase them out, we have to curb, we have to reduce all of these substances that can deplete the ozone layer. So this is phasing out of ozone depleting substances. Then we have Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is a very important agreement, and they are talking about the intended nationally determined contribution. That means the INDCs. You will see this word a lot of time. INDCs are basically the heart of your Paris Agreement. So Paris Agreement talks about how the pollution level or the temperature, basically the temperature of the country or the different countries or the globe was basically increasing. So they decided that yes, the temperature is increasing to 3 degrees Celsius and even more, but there should be 2 degrees Celsius temperature maintained. In fact, they wanted 1.5 degree temperature to be maintained. So for that, there are different INDCs, that is the intended nationally determined contributions, that came into being. So each country said that we will be participating in the Paris Agreement. They signed the agreement and they said that we will do our bit, we will take up initiative so that we can protect the environment. We will do our bit, and this is the heart of Paris Agreement. Right. Then we have Climate Action Plan, and Climate Action Plan talks about the water resource management. Then we have a very important thing, and this is basically the COP3 that we have. This is Kyoto Protocol. So Kyoto Protocol is talking about the emission trading. You should know that there are 2 time periods of Kyoto Protocol, and Kyoto Protocol was also revised. We will also see, but they are talking about the greenhouse gases and how the emission of these greenhouse gases can lead to a lot of problem. So this is emission trading, right? So this is how they are 3 trading, and we will be 3 trading ways or 3 ways to protect the environment, of how you can initiate all these ways, and these are basically 3 ways for different countries given so that they can protect the greenhouse emission of the greenhouse gases. So there are 3 ways, and one of it is the emission trading. We will be discussing it in the further videos. So they are talking about the greenhouse gases and the increasing supply of the greenhouse gases. Right, so I hope this is clear. Then we'll look at the explanation in greater detail. So the first of all, we have Montreal Protocol. Montreal Protocol is a global agreement to protect the stratospheric ozone layer from being phasing out. There are some products and there are some consumption and usage of these products can cause the depletion of the ozone layer. So Montreal Protocol is a global agreement to protect the stratospheric ozone layer by phasing out the production and consumption of ozone depleting substances. So ODS, ozone depleting substances, should be reduced. The Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, that is the Montreal Protocol, is an international agreement that was made when? It was made in 1987. You should remember the dates as well, because questions are seen that when you have to match the dates and the protocols. Right, so you should know that it came into being in 1987. It was designed to stop the production, or you can say the import, of ozone depleting substances and reduce their concentration in the atmosphere to help the protection of the Earth's ozone layer. So to protect the Earth's ozone layer, they came up with this Montreal Protocol, which says that you have to reduce the usage or reduce the consumption of these ozone depleting substances. Then we have the Paris Agreement. So Paris Agreement, it started in 2015 and it is a very important agreement. That came into being in 12th December 2015. Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on the climate change. So we are talking about climate change here. Now we are not talking about the depletion of the ozone layer, but we are talking about the overall climate change. So this is an international treaty. One thing that you should remember, it is for the climate change. Second thing, then you should remember that it is legally binding. Now what is the difference between a protocol that is legally binding and the one that is not legally binding? So the one who is legally binding means that if you are a part of that agreement, if you don't fulfill it, if you don't fulfill your the things that you have announced that you would, then you would be punished, right? But if it is a non-legally binding, it means that whatever promises that you have made, if you don't fulfill them, then also you are not punishable, right? So this is basic difference between the legally binding document and a non-legally binding document. So it was a legally binding document. Whichever countries took part in this kind of treaty, this international treaty, they said that they will work towards the protection of the climate change, and they said that if they do not perform the work well, then they will be punished. So they are working on the climate change. It came into force when? So they started to talk about it. So they adopted it. So we always seen that we adopt things adopt the protocols early, but it came into being, or it starts from after a lot of time, right? So there was a difference of 1 year. So on 12th December 2015, they adopted the Paris Agreement, but it entered into force when? It entered into force on 4th November 2016. So this is the time when we will start talking about the climate change. So its goal, basic goal, is that the limit of the global warming should be below 2 degrees Celsius, and preferably it should be 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial levels. So as compared to the pre-industrial levels, our temperature was rising. So it was about 3 or even more than 3 degrees Celsius, but they said it should be below 2, and these are all your PYQs. They have asked all these figures. You should remember it should be below 2. And what is preferable? Preferable is, in fact, it was 1.5 degrees Celsius. But it was what? It was your 3 degrees Celsius or even more. So they are saying you have to compare it with the pre-industrial level. Whatever temperature was during the pre-industrial level, take it down to that level. To achieve these long-term temperature goals, countries reach out and they aim to have this global, because of this global peak and the excess usage of the greenhouse gas emissions, they came up together that yes, we will achieve this target. So all of these are basically the targets that these countries, in the mid-century, came up together to protect the temperature rise. So the Paris Agreement is a landmark in the multilateral climate change process, because for the first time a binding agreement brings all the nations into a common cause, and they were very ambitious. So it was a very ambitious effort that they took, because why? This was the first time that a multilateral, it talks about a lot of things, and it is a binding agreement. So because if you don't follow it, then you are punishable. So it is a binding agreement. It was a success, and it was a very ambitious effort that it took, that they were taking. Then we talk about the climate action plan. So climate action plan provides evidence-based measures to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and preventive measures to address the negative outcomes of the climate change. So this is an action plan that was taken to provide, and it was an evidence-based measures were taken for it to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So there were, again we saw that the greenhouse gases were increasing and the emission of these gases were increasing. So we came up with again another plan that is called as the climate action plan, and we will see that there should be preventive measures adopted so that the negative outcomes of the greenhouse gas emissions can be curbed down. The plan will demonstrate how the city will adopt and improve its resilience to the climate hazards that are being taken place in the city nowadays. So there are so many risks that are increasing because of the greenhouse gases. Now what you should remember, one thing more, Montreal Protocol is talking about the ozone depleting substances, or it is talking about the ozone layer. Always remember by keywords. If you remember by keywords, then it would be very easy for you to remember. Then it is talking about ozone layer, and when it came into being in 1987. So it is talking about the ODCs, ODS, that is the ozone depleting substances. In the Paris Agreement, we are talking about climate change. So you should know that here we are talking about the climate change, and we are talking about the temperature. And what should be the temperature? The temperature should be either below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. So US and USA, they were doing good, but India was not doing that good. India has, and other countries also, they have their own national determined contributions, and they came up that we will protect the environment. Then we have the climate action plan. This is talking again about the greenhouse gases. So it is talking about the greenhouse gases. So you should remember, and how they said that there are different hazardous chemicals and we have to protect the cities. Then we have the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol is an international agreement that aimed to manage and reduce the carbon dioxide emission and the greenhouse gas emission. So basically Kyoto Protocol came into being because it had to protect the emission or the increased emission of the CO2 and the greenhouse gases. So CO2 level was increasing and the greenhouse gases were also increasing. So we had the Kyoto Protocol, and these all protocols, this is basic, these are the protocols where these are also called as COP, right? So COP is Conference of Parties. So they used to sat together, all of the members who were the part of these Conference of Parties used to sit together each year, and they used to discuss the climatical change problems and the climate related problems. So it started with the UNFCCC. So in 1992 they sat together, and then they started with that, yes, we will be meeting again and again, we'll be meeting, we'll be saying that what is the climatic conditions, how the greenhouse gases are being emitted, and how we can protect the nations, and they'll discuss about it, and they'll discuss it in different countries. So because they really like all of these people who are the part of it, all these countries, they enjoy participating in all these environmental conventions. So they used to meet in different countries, and all the names that are given to these COP parties come up from those countries only. So where was Kyoto Protocol held? Kyoto Protocol this was held in Kyoto, that is in Japan, in 1997. It came internationally into being, right, in your 2005. So Kyoto Protocol was adopted at a conference that was held in Kyoto, that is Japan, in 1997, and became an international law. It became a law, and on February 16, 2005. So this is how they started with Kyoto Protocol. This is COP3. They were meeting in different countries, and the name also comes out of those countries. So they once met in Bali. So that is this Bali Agreement. So that is COP. These are the Conference of Parties, and you should know all of these important COPs, right? Then another question we have, under which of the following agreements was it decided to limit the increase of the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius. So we discussed just now in which agreement they said that the temperature should not rise more than 2 degrees Celsius, and preferably it should be 1.5 degrees Celsius. So is it Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol, Montreal Protocol, or is it your Rio Summit? So what should be the correct answer? The correct answer we all know, it is A, that is Paris Agreement. And what is Kyoto Protocol talking? Kyoto Protocol is talking about your greenhouse gases. Montreal Protocol is talking about the emission of the other ozone depleting substances. So you should know what is your Paris Agreement. Now let us read in greater detail about Paris Agreement, because it is very important. The Conference of Parties at its 21st session adopted the Paris Agreement, and it held when it was in 12th December 2015. So on 12th December 2015, again the 21st session of these COPs, that is the Conference of Parties, was held, and they met in Paris. So it is called as the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement stipulates that it shall enter into force 30 days after the date at which at least 55 parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC, account in total for at least an estimated 55% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions have deposited their instruments of ratification, acceptance and approval, and assertion that the depository, and which is this with the depository, what? The depository is the Secretariat Journal of the United Nations. So they said that we will start with the Paris Agreement, and this will come into force, this will enter into force after the 30 days, after the date when 55 parties that are also a part of UNFCCC account that they will reduce the number of greenhouse gases to 55%. So then it was a legally binding document. They came up together and they decided at least 55 parties would sit and they would work, and they accepted that yes, we will protect the environment and the increase of the greenhouse gases. The agreement was opened for the signature on 22 April 2016 in New York. On 5th October 2016, the threshold for the entry into the force was achieved, and the Paris Agreement entered into force on 4th November 2016. So you don't have to remember all the dates, but you should know that it came into force when? It came into force on 4th November 2016. This agreement is basically enhancing your environmental protection and this is an objective. It aims to strengthen the global response to the strengthening and to change that yes, the climatic conditions are increasing and we have to protect the environment. So I would read, this agreement is basically enhancing the implementation of the convention, including its objective aims to strengthen the global response to the strength of climate change in the context of sustainable development. So the context is there should be sustainable development and climatic conditions should be met, and eradicate poverty. What they will do? They will be doing following things: holding the increase in the global average temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius. The temperature would be held below 2 degrees Celsius according to the pre-industrial level, and pursuing the efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, recognizing that this would significantly reduce the risk and the impact of the climate change. So they came up. So basically what happened, all of these parties, they said that after 30 days we will sign this agreement, we will decide that we will start with Paris Agreement, but about 55 countries that are part of the UNFCCC should come together and they should say that it is legally binding, one thing, and they would reduce the temperature to 55% according to the pre-industrial levels. So the parties agreed, and then it was signed on 22 April 2016 and it came into force. It started to work on your 4th November 2016. They said that there would be the basic aim is to reduce the temperature and to eradicate poverty and also to work for the sustainable development. These are the few things that they said. They said that we will do all these measures so that the temperature does not rise from or above the 2 degrees Celsius according to the pre-industrial levels. And they also said that the basic goal that we will be working till the time we have the temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it was 3 degrees Celsius at that time. They said that it is too much, we should bring it down to 2 degrees Celsius. And then they said that we'll work further till the time it is 1.5 degrees Celsius, because if the temperature is maintained, the risk would be reduced. Then increasingly, they will also increase the ability to adopt adverse effects or adverse impacts of the climate change and foster climate change resilience, and low greenhouse gases would be emitted. And in this manner, they will also protect the threatening of the food production. So because of these greenhouse gases, in fact, the food production is also affected. So they said that they will increase the ability to adopt the adverse impacts of the climate change and foster climate change resilience, and low greenhouse gas emissions. This would be adopted in a manner that it does not threaten the food production. Then they would also make a finance flow possible. So they said that making finance flow consistent with the pathway towards the low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilience would also be adopted. So what is your Paris Agreement? In Paris Agreement, you should write it down. I would change the pen. Yeah. So first of all, few things to learn. In Paris Agreement, it was a conference of party. It started from the UNFCCC sat together and they said that each year we'll be meeting at different places. So this time, this was the 21st session. It came into being on your 12th December 2015. They said that we'll start with it, and this session was held when? This was held on 12th December 2015. Where? In Paris. They said that we will start and we'll come into force after the 30 days when at least 55 parties that are a part of UNFCCC would agree that we will bring down the temperature that is estimated 55 degrees Celsius to the total global warming greenhouse emission, that is the total greenhouse gas emissions that is deposited by the different instructions that are given, right? So they agreed to that. Then what happened? They signed the document on 22 April 2016, and finally when it started on 4th November 2016. This was how Paris Agreement was born. And what were the different aims, objectives and strategies? They said that this is a convention that will work, that eradication of the poverty is done, food consumption is proper, financing is properly done, so that the climate conditions are maintained. We observed that the 3 degrees Celsius was the temperature during that time. That was a very big deal. So they said that we have to reduce it to 2 degrees Celsius, and we'll further take on, we'll keep on making the efforts so that the temperature is 1.5 degree Celsius. They also said that they'll work on the emissions of low greenhouse gases. They'll have different strategies so that less and less amount of greenhouse gases are emitted in the environment. So they'll work so that there is a low greenhouse gas emissions, another thing. Then they would also protect the threatening of the food production that is done because of the high temperature, and proper finance flow would be there, right? So these are the few things. Then during the second commitment period, this is the next question, during the second commitment period, that is from 2013 to 2020, for the parties under the Kyoto Protocol, the target for the reduction of the greenhouse emissions with reference to 1990 levels is what? So we have 7.6, 5.8, 15% and we have 18%. So what should be the correct answer? The correct answer is 18%. I would read the question again. During the second commitment period, so there are two commitment periods of Kyoto Protocol and we will be looking at the explanation, the things would be clearer. So during the second commitment period, that is from 2013 to 2020, then for the parties under the Kyoto Protocol, the target for the reduction of the greenhouse emissions with reference to the 1990 level is what? Now two questions out of it. This is also a PYQ. Once they gave this figure and they asked that till which level you are comparing it. So from which level you are comparing it. So you should know we are comparing it to 1990 level, one thing. And what was basically the agenda? The agenda was 18 degree Celsius. So let us read the explanation because a lot of questions are already asked from this. So Kyoto Protocol, as we know, it is an international treaty aimed to reduce the emission of these greenhouse gases. It aimed at reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that is contributing to the global warming. So we are saying that we have to lessen the amount of emission of the greenhouse gases so that the global warming can be protected. So Kyoto Protocol puts the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is the UNFCCC, into action by committing developing and by the developing countries to restrict the emission of the greenhouse gases. So all the developed and the developing countries came up together that they will reduce the emission of the greenhouse gases. The convention merely requires the countries to establish mitigation plans and actions and report that there should be regular basis and maintain temperatures. It was adopted when it was decided that in December 1997 in Kyoto, they will start with Kyoto Protocol. So in 1997, they talked about Kyoto Protocol. So it was adopted in December 1997 in Kyoto, that is in Japan. So the Kyoto Protocol was again revised in your 2012. So there is another revision that happened on December 8, 2012. They again revised, and this revision happened in Doha, that is in Qatar. So this is again an important date. And why is it important? Because they have already asked this once. What is Doha Amendment? So if they ask you Doha Amendment, so you should know that when the Kyoto Protocol was revised, then it is called as came into being again, and it is called as the Doha Amendment. So 8th December 2012 it was revised again, and you call it as Doha Amendment because this time they met in Doha, that is in Qatar. So the second new parties commitments was adopted from your 2013 to 2020, and this was called as the Doha Agreement or the Doha Amendment, that is in that came into being in December 8, 2012. So the parties promised to cut down the greenhouse gas emissions, and that is all the gases that are because of which global warming is seen, at least by 8% below the 1990 levels in the 8-year period, that is from 2013 to 2020 during the second commitment period. So these are the few things that you should know. So it started in 1997 and the first period ended and not much work was done. So they sat again, this time in Doha. So first time in Kyoto Protocol they are meeting in Japan. The second time they are meeting in Doha, Qatar. So Doha Amendment is the name that was given to the second time where they were meeting. First question, this is also a PYQ. Then this happened when? This happened on December 8, 2012. Second question. Also it started that this was the second, they can also ask you the second commitment period, and the second commitment period is from 2013 to 2000. Then what was the goal that they decided in the second period? In the second period they said that the parties promised that the greenhouse gas emission would protect and would be made least, and till what number they will reduce it? They will reduce it and make it to 18%, and this would be compared to the 1990 level, levels, right? So this is the second commitment period. Second commitment period is 2013 to 2020, right? So these are the few things that you should know. Then this is another question. So Paris Agreement entered into force when the instruments of ratification were deposited by at least 55 countries, which accounted for at least what? So this is also a question that we have done. So what was these agreement that they decided that was legally binding? They said that if we come together, 55 countries would do what? This is the question that they are asking. The Paris Agreement entered into force when the instruments of ratification were deposited by at least 55 countries that were the part of UNFCCC. We discussed it, and they also said that they would do what? They would reduce the CO2 emission to 50%, they would reduce it to 55%, 60% or 75%. So let us see the correct answer. The correct answer we all know is 55% of the global CO2 emissions. Now let us read. So COP21, that is the Paris Agreement, they met in Paris on 12th December 2015. All the parties that were part of it, that is the UNFCCC, reached a landmark agreement to combat the climate change and the acceleration and to accelerate and intensify the actions and the investment needed for the sustainable low carbon future. So this was all done so that we can have sustainable low carbon future. We could approach the environment in such a manner that you protect it for the future generations. So on 12th December 2015, the parties who were a part of UNFCCC met and they decided that we would accelerate, intensify the actions and the investment so that we can have a sustainable low carbon future. The Paris Agreement's central aim is to strengthen the global response to the threat of the climate change that was being happening as the temperature rise was seen during that century. We said that we would bring it below to 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels and to pursue the efforts till the time you limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Paris Agreement opened for signature on what? On 22 April 2016, and one thing you should remember again, this is also PYQ, Earth Day is celebrated on 22 April 2000. Each year 22 April, and the first time when this agreement was signed, the date was also 22 April 2016 at the UN headquarters, that is in your New York. So this is what they were talking. They also said that it stated and it entered into force on 4th November 2016, 30 days after the so-called double threshold. So this time period in which they were all signing the document, it is called as the double threshold. They said that we want about 55 countries who are part of UNFCCC to come up and they would reduce the temperature, the CO2 to 55%. So the ratification by 55 countries that account for at least 55% of the global CO2 emissions had to be met. The Paris Agreement provides a durable framework guiding the global effort for the decades to come. It marks the beginning of a shift towards a net zero emission world. Why is it so important? Because here we want a sustainable future. Here we want that there is a future that you can call it as a low carbon future. We are working towards a low carbon future. We are shifting towards a net zero emission world. This is also one INDC of India. We also want that by 2070 we will achieve the net zero emission. by 2070, India said that there would be zero emission. Right? You should all know all of these things. The Paris Agreement set out to improve upon and to replace the Kyoto Protocol, an earlier international treaty designed to curb the release of the greenhouse gases. So it entered into force on November 4, 2016. It was signed by another PYQ. It was signed by 195 countries and ratified by 1990 as on January 2021, right? So these are the few things that I had for the today's class. I will quickly revise all of these things with you. We'll start from this slide only and from this question. So first of all, here we are talking about Paris Agreement, and we all know that Paris Agreement started when we said that there would be different countries coming together, 55 countries at least coming together, and they ratified that yes, that global emission of the CO2 would be reduced and will work. All of these countries who are emitting and making so much pollution and greenhouse gases are increasing, they would come together and it would be 55% of the global CO2 emission that would be cut. Then another very important thing that they said, that we would provide finance, good finance, so that all these measures can be taken. Because only talking about these measures would not help. We also want that the finance is also there so that we can take different measures. Then they also said that the food production, which is also affected because of the increasing of the greenhouse gases, would also be protected. Another most important thing is that here they talked about the different internationally contributions that they would be given. So it is the INDCs, these are the different contributions that each country gave, that they will try their best to reduce the emission of the carbon dioxide, or you can say emission of the greenhouse gases. As the temperature was rising to 3 degrees Celsius, they said that they will bring it to 2 degrees Celsius and later they will bring it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It was signed when? It was signed on 22 April 2016. Also, why is 22 April important? It is also a Earth Day. They signed it where? They signed it in New York, that is the UN headquarters. This is the first thing that you should know. Then we discussed about Kyoto Protocol, and we discussed that Kyoto Protocol started in and it came into being in 1997, but Paris Agreement would replace it in 2016. So this was also started by UNFCCC as the Conference of Party only. This is COP 3 that we have, and here we are saying that we will reduce the emission of greenhouse gases, and it was not duly met, so they extended the time period, and this time period was extended from 2013 to 2020. The greenhouse gas emission, they said, would be 18% low, and they would compare it to the 1990 level. One important thing, and this year in which they are meeting again, this second duration is called as Doha Amendment. Another question, why? Because this time, this is the name they met in, I wrote it somewhere, this time in 2012 when they met at Doha. So it is also called as the Doha Amendment, another PYQ as I was telling you. So they'll cut the greenhouse gas emission by 18%. So I hope all of these things are clear, right? Sorry. Okay. Then another thing, so we already discussed it, but let us see again. So this Paris Agreement said 3 things, as I told you. Estimated 55% of the decrease, 55 parties would come together, and in 2016 it started, and the temperature estimated, they said that it would be 2 degrees Celsius, but they want it to be 1 degree Celsius, right? So now we had the last question that we discussed. Okay, so we also discussed what is Montreal Protocol. And so what is Montreal Protocol? This is a protocol that came into being because the ozone layer was depleting. So Montreal Protocol is this global agreement, and they said that you have to protect the stratospheric layer and the depletion of the stratospheric layer that is happening because of the increase of the greenhouse gases. So they also said that now we'll be working on the increase in the production and the consumption of these gases that are emitted. So they said that they'll work on the phase phasing out of the production and the consumption of the ozone depleting substances, that is called as the ODS, and it is an international agreement that was started in 1987 and it is working for the protection of the ozone layer. Then the Paris Agreement we have already discussed. We have the climate action plan. This is also for the greenhouse gases, and at the end we had the Kyoto Protocol that came into being in 2005. It has 2 time periods, right? So I hope I made the most important conventions easier for you. These are the questions that are repeatedly asked. You should know all these figures, all small details like the 2 degree Celsius number or the 1.5 degree Celsius number. All of these numbers are repeatedly asked. At which level, which pre-industrial level we are comparing it to. All of these are already asked and they will be asked. Is this document legally binding? Is it not legally binding? Match the following. They can ask you dates and they can ask you why is this agreement or protocol that came into being. So is it for the ozone layer? It is for the climate change problems, or is it for the greenhouse gases? So you should all know all of these things, make your own crisp notes, and all of these things will become easier for you, right? So thank you so much. If you have any doubt, you can write it in the comment section. I'll surely reply to you. Thank you.